Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined by the managing editor of Horns247, Taylor Estes. And Taylor, we are going to review the top 5 storylines from the first week of spring football for the Texas Longhorns. The Texas Longhorns, who are likely going to be picked by everybody to win the Big 12 football championship in 2023. So we probably can't talk enough about the first week of spring football. We will also preview Texas basketball and their tricky first weekend, thanks to the NCAA Tournament Committee going out of their way to try and set up a possible Texas A&M matchup in the second round. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. But Taylor, I thought coming out of the first week of spring football, there was a lot to feel good about. Let's put it that way, because Sark himself is telling us that he's feeling good about things like both lines of scrimmage.
Yeah, and that's huge. I mean, with Texas returning pretty much the entire offensive line who contributed last season, and then even with the newcomer or losing 2 veteran players, Amoro Ojomo and Keandre Coburn from the defensive line, but having so much young talent that's ready to go, I think that's one of the most positive signs of progression, I would say, Chip, for this program, because I think the opposite has been said year in and year out prior to Steve Sarkisian and his staff coming to Texas. And this is just a very this is a sign of what they feel is going to be the type of roster that needs to be put together to compete in the SEC when Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC in 2024. And the fact that even losing 2 veteran guys, longtime starters, leaders on the defensive line, that Sark still thinks that it's one of the things he feels best about. That's huge. Absolutely huge.
Yeah, I mean, you could make an argument that the strongest position on the team is the defensive line. And the defense played really well last year. Obviously, big turnaround. I thought it was the story of the year for the Longhorns. And you're right. I mean, Steve Sarkisian said as he excused his team for spring break, they will return to football, after about 10 days away from the complex. He said those exact words, that even after losing, 2 big time players from the defensive line, like Moro Ojomo, who was the highest rated defensive player for Texas, according to Pro Football Focus, and Keandre Coburn, that they still feel like they're loaded on the defensive line because of Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, and the younger players that they've added, like Sadir Mitchell. You've still got, Zach Swanson and Aaron Bryant, guys who are in the pipeline, in addition to all these edge defenders. Baron Sorrell continues to be mentioned as an emerging leader, and, continues to build his body, and we know he's got the length to be a solid pass rusher. Led the team in sacks last year with 5.5. Needs to take a big step, double that. But then you go to the offensive line, you get all 5 starters back. And obviously you've got a couple of guys out recovering from surgery. Cole Hudson, who started every game at right guard as a true freshman last year, which, that's really kind of okay. Cole Hudson's a tough guy who picked up everything quickly, or he wouldn't have started every game. This now allows DJ Campbell, the top interior lineman recruit in the nation in 2022, to get his confidence level up and get all these important reps so that there's depth. And that's essential. And, it's a little bit of a downer that Connor Robertson had the wrist surgery. He's the backup to Jake Majors at center, but he's not going to be out for long. And the point is the depth and the talent on both lines. Taylor, even the 2009 team that went to the national championship didn't have any all-conference players on the offensive line. In fact, I would say Colt McCoy and Jordan Shipley deserved a medal for that season for the success that they had behind that line. It just wasn't a great line. It didn't send anyone to the NFL. Now Texas has got all kinds of talent in the on the roster, fighting it out in the two deep, and we know there are going to be guys going to the NFL.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Chip. And yeah, I totally agree. I think Colt McCoy and Jordan Shipley really hid the deficiencies that Texas did have on the offensive line, and those were glaring in 2010, following that national championship run season in 2009. So yeah, this is huge. And remember, this is an offensive line, Chip, that there weren't even enough bodies last year at this time to have a regular spring game because they didn't have too deep of a line of offensive line to go against each other in the spring game. And so for it to turn so quickly, we obviously knew that the offensive line signing class from 2022 was special and elite and probably one of the better offensive line classes in college football in recent years, coming out of the high school ranks. But I don't think you really expected it to translate so quickly. And, guys like Calvin Banks, guys like, as you said, Cole Hudson, being starters is something unique. And, Texas is fortunate to have had them. But then you have other guys, Cam Williams was a guy that Kyle Flood talked a lot about at the Alamo Bowl as somebody who's progressed a ton that the public doesn't see because, it's in practice that he's getting this. And DJ Campbell being another one too. It's night and day different, right? Even under Tom Herman, the guys that they did sign never seemed to pan out, or they didn't stay on the roster, honestly. And they missed out on a ton of talent too. So it's kind of incredible, honestly. And it's a huge testament of what Steve Sarkisian and his staff is selling. It's a huge testament of what these players and recruits think of Kyle Flood as a developer of offensive line talent. And whatever they're selling to them, it's working for sure. And the fact that it's working so well on both lines of scrimmage is a probably one of the biggest storylines of spring football as a positive for Texas.
Yeah, and that kind of leads us into our second top storyline coming out of the first week of spring football, and that is that Steve Sarkisian volunteered that we are a deep team. And that, when you start talking about being a deep team and having both lines of scrimmage be a strength, that's when you're talking about a team that should be contending for a conference championship and maybe for Texas's first ever berth in the college football playoff. And you just hit on the position that probably has grown the most, offensive line. Last spring, they didn't have 10 scholarship offensive linemen to go through the spring. You had a bunch of walk-ons. They didn't have a spring game, a normal, typical spring game because of that lack of offensive linemen. Now you're stacked, and receiver was a question mark going into last year because you had Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington, and not really, you had the hope and promise of Isaiah Nair, but then he suffers an ACL tear in fall camp, and immediately it was a huge concern, and it proved to be a concern throughout the season. Although Casey Kane showed flashes, and you saw little glimpses here and there of Savion Red and Brennan Thompson, it wasn't what Steve Sarkisian says he has now at the receiver position, with the additions of early enrollee freshman Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, the portal addition of A.D. Mitchell from Georgia. And then, at tight end, you've got Jatavian Sanders and Gunnar Helm. Juan Davis is in his coming into his third year of college football, you've got depth at critical positions. And on defense, the depth is still emerging. But for Steve Sarkisian to say we're a deep team, and that wasn't a question. Are you a deep team? That was him saying in the course of an answer, we are a deep team. And so I think that's a big positive.
It is, yeah. And Steve Sarkisian, I mean, obviously every coach does give coach speak answers a lot, but Steve Sarkisian is not the type that's going to willingly say something like that if he didn't truly believe it. At least we haven't seen him say something that was totally BS, really, honestly, in talking to us when he offers up the information, not, asked about it and just responding to a question about it. So I fully believe when he says we're a deep team, I fully believe that he not only feels it, but they see it, and they see it, across the board. The wide receiver position, Chip, is a good example of how deep they are with Savion Red moving out of the position. I mean, if they were concerned about the depth at wide receiver, they wouldn't be moving a guy who did contribute at that position last season to a new position. And so I think that in itself is a really good example. And it shows that the staff, I know that Chris Jackson's a new addition. He was obviously hired on after Texas had signed this class, but still, I mean, it just goes to show that the recruiting on offense and at wide receiver is still going even after the kind of drop off season that the receivers had last year, which also was part of the passing game too. It definitely played into it. And then with Steve Sarkisian telling us now that Xavier Worthy had a bone that was broken in his hand and that limited him. I mean, a lot of it makes sense now, but I mean, this is just, it's hard to really knock much of what Steve Sarkisian and the staff are doing from a recruiting standpoint and then a development standpoint too. When, they can turn a position around in less than 12 months, like they did for both wide receiver and offensive line.
Yeah. I mean, that offensive line recruiting haul, the development, as you said, was huge, and it will continue to be huge. We saw, Jaden Chapman, the early enrollee freshman, getting some second team reps at left tackle. They feel good about, his growth and what they've seen from him so far. And that's probably the other thing about the depth is, I wrote about it in the Morning Brew on Tuesday morning about Lianga Lafau and Anthony Hill. And both of these guys are seen as guys who are going to be impact players. How quickly, up to them, and how they continue to grow through the spring, summer, and into fall camp. But these coaches can already tell from their work ethic, their hunger, the way they're picking things up, that if they're not, let's say they're not starters in 2023, they're going to be starters probably in 2024 and have a big impact. So even guys you're not, likely to see in the starting lineup, Jalen Ford is your middle linebacker. Lianga Lafau is fighting hard to be his backup, but they really like Lianga Lafau and feel like, that's a guy who can be an impact player. And, I don't think Steve Sarkisian says we're a deep team unless he feels like they do have depth at linebacker after losing DeMarvion Overshone and, a guy who's so versatile like Overshone, losing Ovia Gofu, who, played that kind of strong side linebacker, jack end position. You lost, Deshaun Jameson, you lost Anthony Cook, but you brought in Jalen Catalon at safety, and you brought in Gavin Holmes from Wake Forest, who's looked great at corner. And I think Steve Sarkisian, I've said it, has done a great job in the portal. I mean, he's done an incredible job recruiting high school kids with, obviously all the players we just talked about, but he's also done a nice job in the portal Ryan Watts was a huge contributor last year. We all think Isaiah Nair is going to be a big contributor. A.D. Mitchell, now Gavin Holmes, Jalen Catalon.
Quinn Ewers.
Quinn Ewers. I mean, we'll get to Quinn Ewers here in our next storyline. But yeah, I mean, I think that's, Steve Sarkisian, you're right. He's not a guy who's going to, try and, build up something that's not there. He's going to tell you like it is. I mean, going into last season, he said his biggest concerns were on the offensive line, the secondary, and special teams. And offensive line got it going. The secondary had some struggles with communication, but we'll see if they can get that tied up. For the most part, the defense was solid.
Yeah. And Steve Sarkisian, you can tell when, I think it was the early signing period press conference that he had, when he talked and was asked about Lianga Lafau. I mean, he could not speak higher of this kid. And, Anthony Hill, obviously people expect him, I think, to be a guy that could make an early impact because he was, one of the number one linebacker, I believe, in the country, 5-star player coming in, looks the part, has the tools, a really high ceiling type of player. But Lianga Lafau was not the number 2 linebacker in the country or anything like that. But Steve Sarkisian, when he talked about him and the impact he's made in his community, he does a football camp every year, and he wants to continue to do that in Hawaii year in and year out. And then also him being so dedicated to wanting to play football at Texas, to go from Hawaii to Austin, Texas. I mean, if anybody has made that trip, I went to Hawaii a couple of years ago. It is not easy. That is an 8-hour trip if you're fortunate.
It's like going to Europe.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lengthy journey, and the fact that Lianga Lafau so badly wanted to be at Texas and his parents were so on board for him to be there is something really special and really important. And, I think there's a lot of people who are credit to that. Jeff Choate did a really good job in recruiting him too. He's probably one of the unsung heroes, I would say, of the 2023 signing class. Jeff Banks obviously is really good too, but Jeff Choate did a solid job. I mean, the fact that Texas is losing a guy like DeMarvion Overshone, and you haven't heard Steve Sarkisian talk yet about linebacker being a concern, should speak volumes.
Yeah. And obviously David Benda and Maurice Blackwell, Mo Blackwell, are the guys who are trying to fend off these young guys and get into that starting lineup in replacing Overshone. And I'm hearing it's a battle. So This is going to be fun to watch. And Taylor, as we move into the, you mentioned Quinn Ewers, leadership, Steve Sarkisian also brought that up as a strength, unprovoked, said the leadership. He said he's really pleased with the depth of leadership. And Quinn Ewers is a guy he identified as someone who's stepping up as a leader, and not just because of the haircut, but he gets it. And I think the accountability he took at the Alamo Bowl, after struggling in the Oklahoma State game, after struggling in some games down the stretch, and Texas really needing to rely on the run to finish off games against Baylor, Kansas State, Kansas. But Quinn Ewers is really stepping it up, and that we heard that in winter conditioning. We also heard it from Steve Sarkisian when spring football started, and Quinn Ewers being identified as a leader on offense. Jake Majors, Christian Jones, Jordan Whittington, and Steve Sarkisian continues to bring up Xavier Worthy as a leader. Most recently saying that he was trying to show Jonte Cook how you have to block a safety on a play. And that's not always been Xavier Worthy's strength. He's kind of a wispy guy, but he'll, stick his nose in there. And Steve Sarkisian said they had that same play come up a little bit later in that practice. And there was Xavier Worthy sticking his face in there trying to block Jaron Thompson coming downhill. So, that's all positive, because Xavier Worthy's been a bit of an enigma, a guy people are like, is he even going to be here? Right. And everything we've heard is that he's all in. He's treating this like a contract year. He will be draft eligible after this season, and that he's growing up. And so that's big.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think he was so impactful as a true freshman that I feel like maybe people may forget that he was only a true sophomore last year. And, now knowing that he dealt with an injury for half of the season makes a lot of sense, but I think, I imagine that he's looking at Chris Jackson, the addition of him, being a NFL coach only. He's never really coached at the college level. He's always been in the pros. Xavier Worthy, the fact that his focus seems really on point, and Steve Sarkisian brings him up as a guy that's a leader, both, with his actions on the field and also with his willingness to make changes, in his game and when he is in practice, like Steve Sarkisian mentioned that. It's hard not to wonder if that is a product of adding Chris Jackson into the mix, with him just having such a lengthy experience of being a pro football coach, because that's obviously Xavier Worthy's goal, is to play in the NFL. He wants to be an NFL football player. He wants to be elite. And Steve Sarkisian's talked a lot about, he's a guy that's, first one at practice, last one to leave, really puts in a lot of work that I don't think a lot of people do see. And I wonder if it's kind of a challenge that Chris Jackson has kind of brought to the table for him, knowing what type of talent he could be.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you talk about that leadership, and then you flip over to the defensive side of the ball, and Jalen Ford, who probably should have been the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, is a guy.
He should have been for sure. Yeah.
He's always the first name that Steve Sarkisian mentions when he's talking about the leadership on the defensive side. Jaron Thompson, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, and Jalen Catalon even. And so even though Catalon, like we said, he's, they're managing his contact, and they don't want to, do something stupid and aggravate the shoulder injury. They'll get into the contact when they need to, or when they feel like he's maybe stronger after summer. But they already have identified him as a leader for the young safeties at that position, like BJ Allen and Larry Turner Gooden. So, anytime your leadership is one of the things that is being talked about as a strength, again, that's a sign. And we've talked about Steve Sarkisian's culture, that he hasn't lost players that he wanted to keep, with the exception of Hudson Card. And so, the culture appears to be strong, and that's a positive. And then when you have your best players who are stepping up and holding each other accountable, that's when the magic happens.
Yeah. And just think about the 180 that has happened since Steve Sarkisian's first year when it comes to the culture and the leadership, not having the player leadership. Roschon Johnson kind of took it upon himself, asking Sark if he could kind of fill that role, because he felt that, they can hear it from the coaches all they want, but it's got to come from the players and your teammates and holding one another accountable. I mean, that was less than 2 years ago. Remember? I mean, that was midway through, I think, his first football season that conversation was had. And so, Sark's first year at Texas when Roschon Johnson did that. I mean, that is, I think, the first year, obviously, it's hard to excuse 5 and 7. There were clearly issues from a player perspective in the locker room. The bad apples, it appears, have been removed from the equation. As you said, Sark, aside from Hudson Card, they've really been able to hold on to the guys that they want to hold on to. The guys they lost to the portal have not necessarily been ones that they were surprised or trying to hold on to keep on the roster. So that in itself is huge. And that's where I feel like, Torrey Beckton and his staff deserve a ton of credit too, because they're the culture coaches. The strength and conditioning coach, the strength and conditioning program sets the tone of the culture, and players are clearly bought in enough to him and the what they're selling that they're now taking in and running with it themselves. And hearing guys like Quinn Ewers become, more of a leader. You want that. You want your quarterback to be able to get into guys' faces if he needs to. And, Vince Young was amazing leader. Colt McCoy, amazing leader. Sam Ehlinger, even say what you will about Sam Ehlinger, his leadership was on point, day in and day out. His work ethic was like, it set an example to Casey Thompson of how to prepare as a starting quarterback. And Casey Thompson, before he transferred to Nebraska, credited Sam Ehlinger for that. And you need a quarterback that's going to set the example, set the tone, and also, keep guys accountable. And the quicker that Quinn Ewers can embrace that and really, take it on, the better it is for the entire locker room, and the better it is, especially for the offense.
Yeah, no doubt. And that leads us to our fourth top storyline from the first week of spring football. And that is that, speaking of quarterbacks, Maalik Murphy, the sophomore quarterback, or redshirt freshman, I should say, who, was healthy through winter conditioning and then suffered a foot injury. It's kind of a re-aggravation is what I was told, of a previous injury, and it kept him out of the first week of spring football. But I've talked to people, and Steve Sarkisian says that Maalik Murphy should be okay when spring football resumes, and that will get him back on the field and back to competing, and that's an important position, as we've talked about, not only quarterback on a football team, but for Maalik Murphy, who's had some, it's been a little bit of a rough road for him getting started, coming off the broken ankle in the state championship game, then the scooter accident last year. He just hasn't been healthy for an extended period of time. And we know he's a big, strong guy with a great personality. We want to see him get on the field and compete. And it looks like we're going to get to see that here over the second half of spring football.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest, I don't want to say necessarily question marks, but maybe it is a little bit, is who the backup, is there a capable backup quarterback to Quinn Ewers? Obviously there's a high ceiling for both Maalik Murphy and for Arch Manning, but they're young. Both of them are really young. Maalik Murphy didn't play any games. He at least has a year in the playbook, in the offense, being at Texas as an early enrollee, but still there's difference between, reading about what you need to do and studying what you need to do than actually doing it on the field. And so the quicker that Maalik Murphy, I think, can come back into the mix, the better. And that's not me like overlooking Arch Manning or anything like that. I think, the headlines especially with his last name being Manning, of course, has led, the quarterback battle talk in Austin. I don't think that's really the case. I think it's more if Maalik Murphy can compete with Arch Manning for the backup position behind Quinn Ewers, and whoever is the guy that, fills that role, they've got to be ready at any given notice. I mean, that Texas fans saw it last year. Quinn Ewers went through it. Hudson Card was ready to go, and he played through injury and he did extremely well. But Texas doesn't have a guy that has any experience at the college level taking snaps to back up Quinn Ewers. So I feel like the sooner that Maalik Murphy can get back into practice, get the reps, kind of show what he can do, the better it is as a whole. Because I think it's fair to say you for sure need two capable quarterbacks in college football. You never know when one's going to go down. I mean, look at what the 2009 national championship game against Alabama, what happened? Colt McCoy went down in that game, and there's just and then Alabama again, Quinn Ewers goes down. So you've got to have a capable guy ready. I want to see if Maalik Murphy can be that guy.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think the backup quarterback is maybe the biggest question mark on this football team right now. So that is a significant storyline coming off the first week of spring. And our final storyline that we'll talk about coming off the first week of spring is, will Texas have a featured running back, or will it be by committee? Now, this is early, obviously. Jonathan Brooks is not even participating in spring football, and he would be considered the leader of this group. But, I think you look at the fact that Jaden Blue is getting a lot of reps right now. You've got Keelan Robinson, who's coming off of a muscle strain, and they've been careful with. But CJ Baxter, the freshman, has been getting a ton of run. And as we mentioned, Savion Red making the move from receiver to running back has looked really good, catching the football and just taking to the position quickly. And Steve Sarkisian brought it up again, Taylor, as they were exiting for spring break, about how he's always had 1,000-yard rusher as a play caller in his 8 full years as a head coach. And he's like, I don't know if we're going to have one. We may be by committee, but the bottom line is we're now going to, as we get into the more padded practices, the contact, the more scrimmage situations over the second half of spring, the coaches are going to have a better idea if they've got a guy who they think can carry it 20 times and hold up and catch the football and do all the things that they need the running back to do in this offense.
Yeah. And that's, definitely one of the biggest questions and storylines too. I think Texas has a ton of talent in the running back room, but as you said, it may be by committee. We just don't know that yet. It's going to be really hard to replace the production, obviously, of Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson. Those are, in my opinion, the two, dual running backs in college football last year. The two-headed monster, I would say that they were just, those are special guys. It's going to be really difficult to immediately fill those shoes, but I don't know if necessarily Texas needs to do that. You know what I mean? Like, they were relied upon to carry the offense, carry the load on the offense too in 2022, because they had a young offensive line. They had a young first-time starting quarterback. They had some questions at receiver. So they were called upon to do that, and they obviously answered the call. I just don't think the running game is going to be needed as crucially as it was last season, because I do think with the offensive line being 1 year older, Quinn Ewers having a season of starting experience, in the playbook, understanding the expectations, understanding what he needs to do, understanding what he needs to work on, and being open and talking to us about that. I think, and then, add to the mix the talent at receiver that's, they feel good enough about the depth to let a receiver move to running back to try to fill some of the void left that Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson had. So I think, maybe Sark will want to keep that 1,000-yard rusher, trend going for him. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think it means that the offense is going to be bad if Texas doesn't have a 1,000-yard rusher, a single one in 2023. I think it's just going to be a sign that the rest of the offense progressed, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I think as long as they are able to run it when they need to run it, if they need to be able to make yards on 3rd and short, they need to be able to run out the fourth quarter like we saw them do against Baylor and against Kansas State. They're going to need to run it when they really have to. And
right.
You look at, I keep going back to Quinshon Judkins at Ole Miss last year as a true freshman. Remember, Zach Evans transferred to Ole Miss, and he couldn't beat out Quinshon Judkins, the true freshman, who ended up rushing for 1,500 yards. And CJ Baxter is a special talent. We'll see. I think Jonathan Brooks is a special talent, and we'll see how these coaches, how Tashard Choice and Steve Sarkisian want to bring these guys along. We saw Tom Herman be, gradual with Bijan Robinson. And I joke all the time, if Tom Herman would have given, Bijan Robinson, 15 carries a game his freshman year, Herman might still have a job at Texas, because he probably would have won the Big 12 title in 2020. But it's going to be fun to watch this competition unfold, and it probably won't get into the nitty gritty until fall camp, but we're getting early glimpses of what a guy like CJ Baxter, what Jaden Blue, who hasn't played football in a minute. He's kind of the Quinn Ewers of running backs. He didn't play his senior year of high school, and then he redshirted last year. So he's been, it's been a couple of years since he's been in the thick of it.
Yeah, and maybe Jonathan Brooks' timing of his injury came at an ideal timing for the overall running back room. With Jaden Blue being able to get the first team reps and to start spring ball. We haven't been told if Jonathan Brooks is going to be put back into the mix yet. He had the hernia surgery after the Alamo Bowl. So I don't think that there's really a hustle to get him in the mix, but we haven't been told any type of time frame for return. But, maybe this is a good thing for the future of the room with Jaden Blue getting more reps in practice. I mean, he didn't get any. You have to think of what the running back depth was last year. It was Bijan, Roshan, Keelan Robinson / Jonathan Brooks, and then Jaden Blue. I mean, I'm sorry, but the fifth team running back is not getting quality reps in practice. It's not happening. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And so he now has the opportunity to do that. CJ Baxter also, getting the second team reps in practice at running back. I think that's good. Even if it doesn't mean that he's going to be the second team running back when the season starts, it doesn't hurt him at all for being an early enrollee and starting to kind of learn what he needs to learn at the college level, being such an elite player. He's definitely someone to watch, I think, Chip. And I think Anthony Hill and CJ Baxter are Chip's man crushes for sure. One offense, one defense from the 2023 class. But I think they're legit, though. I think that those guys really are special. And CJ Baxter, we had his high school coach on here, hearing him talk about him as a leader, everything. He's what you want in a 5-star running back. And so the future looks bright there. If he can push Jonathan Brooks, Jaden Blue will be interesting to see.
Yeah, and this is a super critical spring for Jaden Blue for all the reasons we just mentioned, but he can't really get in the portal and go anywhere until he shows what he can do.
Right.
Because, he didn't play his senior year of high school, and, that's a depends on who you talk to situation about, whether he, had a positive high school experience or not. And now he's got to prove to himself. He's got to prove to himself that he's still the guy. And then he's got to prove it to the coaches. And he's in a battle right now. And so Steve Sarkisian talked about the maturity that he has been able to block out the noise. And, when he brought up Jatavian Sanders as an example, well, what's going on with Jatavian? Why isn't he playing as a true freshman? Well, he needed to learn. He needed to grow. He needed to develop all the little parts of his game that you have to be competent in to earn the trust of the coaches. And from what Steve Sarkisian is saying, Jaden Blue is picking up on those things, and he's putting in the kind of work he needs to put in. And he's going to get tested because CJ Baxter's a special talent, and that should just breed great competition, iron sharpening iron, and maybe that's why we're not hearing any alarms at this point from the coaching staff about we don't have an answer for replacing Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson, because it sounds like they feel like with the development that will occur this spring, summer, and into fall camp, they'll be okay.
Yeah, for sure. And Jaden Blue deciding to sit out his senior year, that could also rub other coaches the wrong way too. If he was a guy that thought he needed to go to the transfer portal or something like that. I mean, even his recruiting ranking, he was either a 5-star or on the verge of being a 5-star prospect. Then that happened, and his rating dropped substantially. And a lot of people thought it wasn't fair, but it's kind of like, well, where's this guy's head? You can't really call him a 5-star if he is willing to sit out as a senior of high school just for anything other. I mean, Quinn Ewers obviously did the same thing. It was a little bit different though. Like his was to make $1 million as an NIL deal at Ohio State to reclassify. Jaden Blue's was, from what, I mean, you hear different things, but I think publicly was to protect himself with like reps or something like that from a health standpoint. That rubbed even, people that rate these the recruits and the prospects a negative way, because he fell to being a mid 4-star type of player. And So he's got to, I think you brought up a good point. He's got to prove it to himself first, but he's got a lot to prove too, just of where he is mentally and how bought in he really is. And, I feel like he wouldn't be a guy that Steve Sarkisian is talking about too much if there was concern that he may not be bought in at this point.
Yeah. All right. Before we get to love it or leave it, let's talk a little Texas basketball heading into March Madness. And everybody's filling out their brackets. And Taylor, I got to say, I was a little surprised by all the experts who were picking Texas to get to the Final Four. Dick Vitale, Jay Billis, Seth Greenberg. It seemed like everywhere I was turning, Texas was beaten into the Final Four. And I think the Midwest region where they are is rough. I mean, you mentioned it, even Colgate, a team that will spread you out and shoot threes, if they get hot, is going to be a tough out. Now, Texas plays good defense. They pressure the ball. They force turnovers. I think they'll get by Colgate. But then you've got Texas A&M playing Penn State, in my mind, easily the best first-round matchup of the tournament, because both of these teams, first of all, Texas A&M was the second-place regular season finisher in the SEC. A league with Tennessee and Alabama and Kentucky and Arkansas. And then they're going up against Penn State, which just got to the finals of the Big Ten tournament and pushed Purdue to the brink, and has, one of the toughest matchups in the tournament when you're talking about Jalen Pickett, a guy who, averages 18 points, 7.3 rebounds, and 6.7 assists per game. I mean, he's everywhere. And whoever comes out of that game, A&M or Penn State, is going to be a tough matchup for Texas, especially on a turnaround. And I've compared A&M to TCU in the Big 12 and Penn State to Baylor, because they're going to spread you out. But Penn State has probably a little bit more of an edge to him because of Jalen Pickett, who can get to the rim. He rebounds. He creates for his teammates. I mean, I'm picking Texas to get to the Sweet 16, but man, they're gonna have to earn it.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's so many people that look at them as a Final Four team when they're in the same, the Midwest region with Houston, who has been so elite. I mean, the Big 12 basketball conference next year is going to be really good, I think, with the additions of Houston and that. But I'm with you. I feel like maybe we're a little bit gun shy a little when it comes to picking Texas to go far in the NCAA tournament, because they've only had one win since 2011.
One.
Yeah. So, and it happened last year. I mean, I feel like it's kind of one of those, I've got to see it first. I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but it's going to be hard for me to pick them to follow what the experts are saying right now, just because you never know when March happens and Texas is in the NCAA tournament. Who knows? They could lose by a buzzer beater halftime shot. You never know what happened a few years ago, so this is they definitely did not win any or get any favors, I would say, from the committee who puts together the NCAA tournament bracket. And pardon me, Chip, I wonder if they intentionally put A&M and Texas to be teams that would play potentially a round two. So I feel like everyone's going to tune in, right?
Oh, I mean, you've got there's no doubt, because both A&M and Penn State could have been seeded a line higher. A&M, again, second place in the regular season in the SEC, and reached the tournament final as a 7 seed.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have put them on a 5 line, and some people feel like it's because Buzz Williams and A&M complained so loudly about not getting in last year that they wanted to make sure that they had a nice, tough test here this year. But I look over at like the East region where Purdue is the number 1 seed, and that's well deserved. But you've got Tennessee, whose point guard is now hurt, and they're a 4 seed, and they look, like they could be ripe for an upset. And Houston, the reason, I think people are shy about picking Houston all the way to the Final Four is because of the groin injury to Marcus Sasser, their best player. And can he hold up with that injury? And they've got a really tough, possible second round matchup with, in my opinion, I think Iowa beats Auburn. Iowa is, this balanced team that defends, they're long. I just think this is going to be a lot of fun, and it is exciting for Texas fans because coming off that Big 12 tournament, every player for the Longhorns was playing well. Every player who got on the court was making a difference. I mean, you had big time effort and performance, even from guys like Arterio Morris, the emergence of Dylan Dezue at the center position, averaging 18 points over those 3 games, dominating against Kansas. That's why people feel so good about Texas. If they can maintain that level, then they are a threat to go to the Final Four. We're just talking about the first weekend. We'll come back next week, hopefully, and talk about what is facing the Longhorns possibly in a Sweet 16 matchup. And everyone wants to know how far does Rodney Terry need to get with this team to secure the job? And I've said he needs to go as far as he can. I mean, because there may be other candidates that Texas is looking at who are also in the tournament. And let's be honest, Shaka Smart is got a great team at Marquette. People are picking Marquette to go to the Final Four. He didn't win an NCAA tournament game at Texas. This is not an easy place to coach. You have to know exactly who you are. Typically, they hire coaches who've already done it because those coaches have a method and a system and have shown they can recruit and get to the promised land. So this tournament has a lot riding on it, not just how far Texas can go and grab some more Directors Cup points, but the fate of Rodney Terry could be riding, on these first couple of games in Des Moines, starting Thursday night at about 6:30.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch for sure, and there's no shortage of news surrounding Texas athletics. I feel like all the time, the Texas basketball at this time of year with, who's going to take over and if they're going to, leave Rodney Terry to remove the interim tag and make him the head coach. I mean, he's going to be a head coach. We said this Monday, Chip. He's going to be a head coach somewhere in college basketball next year, whether it's at Texas or elsewhere. So, but yeah, he has a chance to prove it. And I feel like how far it's like he's got to at least the Sweet 16, if not to the Elite 8, I would say, to make it to where it's like, how can you not keep him, right?
Right. I think you're right. I mean, according to the seeding, Texas should reach the Elite 8, but we know that that's easier said than done. And but I do think get out of the first weekend, you really start to make it a difficult decision. You get to the Elite 8, and now you're playing possibly Houston, the number 1 seed. Man, it'd be really hard not to give Rodney Terry the job if Texas makes it to the Elite 8, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Taylor, you ready for some Love It or Leave It?
I am. Before we get to Love It or Leave It, we're going to take a really quick break, but stay tuned. We have more football and basketball talk coming up. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will just continue on here. All right, Chip, my first Love It or Leave It for you is Love It or Leave It. The best news coming out of the first week of spring football is Steve Sarkisian saying he feels both lines of scrimmage will be a strength.
I'm going to love this because we haven't heard this in 15 years. I mean, I probably since the 05, maybe 08. No, I don't think we heard it in 08. 07 was kind of a mess on the offensive line. So was 08. Remember, Colt McCoy led the team in rushing in 08. They still should have played for a national championship that year, but we just haven't heard this. We haven't heard this in 15 years. And it's believable. I mean, it's credible what Steve Sarkisian is saying. And I think the fact that the defensive line took a big step last year, the offensive line obviously took a big step. You win in the trenches, you win in the SEC in the trenches. Texas needs to win in the Big 12 in 2023 in the trenches, especially with a young, inexperienced, I should say, running back, whoever he is or whoever they are. And also, your pressure up front on defense just makes life so much better for everyone behind them on defense. So I'm going to love this, Taylor. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to love it. And for honestly, the exact same reasons. I don't need to repeat everything you just said, but like, this is not something that is commonly said about Texas football, at least in my career covering Texas. And as Chip mentioned, going back to probably when I was still in college, honestly, or high school, and so, yeah, I mean, this is new and it's legitimate. It doesn't come off to me as coach speak. I would be surprised if either one of these positions was a liability for Texas this next season, barring any type of like substantial injuries to key starters or anything like that. But still, no, I think that the fact that Steve Sarkisian feels good enough to say it, and that we're sitting here believing it and not, nitpicking his words and saying, well, they do have this, liability or something like that. That's not the case. I mean, so yeah, this is huge. You have to win up front in order to be an elite team. You have to consistently do that too, in order to, bring Texas football back to the glory days and glory years of college football supremacy. And this has been both lines of scrimmage haven't been the best in recent years. There have been some years, there's been some players that are good, but overall they haven't been the strengths of the team. And so the fact that it is this year, and we believe that what Steve Sarkisian is saying, and we've seen the development from the coaching staff like Kyle Flood and Bo Davis and what they've been able to do at their positions, there's no reason to question it right now. So, and that's really a huge positive. So I'm definitely going to love this one too.
Yeah. I mean, typically when you're looking at how you're going to project a team, you look at both lines of scrimmage and the quarterback.
Yeah.
And if you're loaded or got a bunch of starters returning on both lines of scrimmage, and you have a quarterback who's, shown the potential to be a championship type quarterback, that's how you get picked to win the conference. All right. Yeah. Love it or leave it, number 2.
Second one, love it or leave it. The top concern coming out of the first week of spring football is whether Texas will have a featured running back or not.
I'm going to leave this because there's plenty of time to worry about this later. I would say the top concern is Maalik Murphy and getting him back on the field and getting him competing to be the backup quarterback for Quinn Ewers this year. So that I think the plan was for Quinn Ewers to tear it up at quarterback in 2023, maybe go on to the NFL, and, for Maalik Murphy and Arch Manning to battle it out in 2024 with the, loser of that competition being the backup quarterback. So for all that to play out, Maalik Murphy needs to get going. He needs reps. He needs to build that confidence and build confidence and trust from his teammates that he's able to stay on the field. I mean, that's kind of a crazy thing to say about a guy who's 6'6", 245 and looks like he's made of steel, and yet, he hasn't been on the field much. How about you, Taylor?
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it too. I think it's too early to say that a top concern is anything about running back, especially with Jonathan Brooks being out right now. I mean, he's going to be the first team, more than likely going to be the first team guy when he does return to the mix. And, I think that he's fully capable of being the guy, but I also think that the room's talented enough to where it's not going to be a huge impact if there isn't one featured running back. So, and I agree. I think Maalik Murphy getting back in the mix, getting healthy is probably the biggest concern after the first week. Hopefully, Steve Sarkisian said he was going to spend his spring break in Austin to have another full week of rehabbing to get back into the mix. Hopefully that goes well. Hopefully there's no more setbacks and that he's ready to go, because that's a crucial aspect to the success of this team. As weird as it sounds, is making sure there is a capable backup quarterback in case their number is called.
Yeah. All right. Love it or leave it, number 3.
All right. Final one. Love it or leave it. The Texas basketball team will reach the Sweet 16.
I'm going to love this. It's not going to be easy, folks. Colgate, okay? The 15 seed is the number 1 team in college basketball in 3-point field goal percentage at 40.6. Colgate has 5 starters who average double figures, and they shoot 40.6 from the 3 as a team. Texas is a good defensive team. They're going to have to chase guys off the line. They're going to have to pressure Colgate into turnovers so that they don't even get the looks at that from the 3-point line. But then you get past Colgate and you've got 2 of the hottest teams with 2 of the, each Texas A&M and Penn State have leading scorers who are dynamic. A&M's going to bully you. They're going to attack the basket over and over again. They're going to draw fouls. They get to the free throw line more than any other team in college basketball. And then Penn State, we talked about Jalen Pickett, a guy who's, averaging 18 points and 7 rebounds and almost 7 assists a game. The guy is like a one-man triple-double. Oh, and by the way, he's got, a bunch of teammates who can hit the 3. And they have some size. A&M is more like TCU. They're kind of like a bunch of 6'9", 6'6", 6'7" guys, which that gives Texas trouble with their guard heavy, their reliance on Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter and Serge Barry Rice. So I just think these are going to be fantastic games, but I love the way Dylan Dazoo's playing right now and Christian Bishop. And I think Texas is the better defensive team of those 3 I just mentioned. So I'm gonna say I love this, Taylor. Texas to the Sweet 16. It won't be easy. How about you?
Man, I want to say I love it, but it is really a challenging road ahead. And it starts with Colgate, as you mentioned, hitting 40.6% of 3-pointers that leads college basketball. To put into comparison, Texas, I think, is hitting like 33% as a team at 3-pointers. So, and honestly, when it comes to the NCAA tournament, I look a lot more at scoring than I do at defense, because I feel like if a team gets hot on you, you could have the best defense out there. But if they're hot and they're rolling, this is why they call it March Madness. That's where the upsets tend to happen. And so I'll love it. Because I do hope for Rodney Terry, honestly, with what he's done. I want him to get all the credit in the world for what this team is and the staying together and him keeping the wheels, or the train on the track a little bit, as they've all been through so much turmoil, adversity. None of them asked for this. And I would like to see it continue for him, because I think that he's done such a phenomenal job. So I'm going to love it out of hope for Texas fans to watch their team go to the Sweet 16 for the first time in over a decade now, I think it is. And also for Rodney Terry, because it's just, you don't want this Cinderella story of a season to end early, because I feel like it'll diminish what they actually did and what Texas basketball actually overcame this year in becoming one of the top seeded teams in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And it's not fair, but that is typically how the season's remembered, for what you did in the NCAA tournament. Real quickly, the Texas women are playing at 9:00 at night on Saturday in their first round game. Vic Schaefer was like, "Are you kidding me?" He's like, "We have fans, we have older fans We have fans with young kids. They're all going to need naps. And so it'll be a great day of basketball on, well, hopefully it is, because the Texas men would also be playing on Saturday if they get past Colgate. So the Texas women are playing at the Moody Center, their first, hopefully, 2 games. So as the 4 seed in something called the Seattle 4 region. So, hey, everybody, we'll have a lot to talk about between now and our next Flagship Podcast episode. So make sure you're over at horns247.com and make sure you're subscribed to the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. Just hit that subscribe button right below the screen there so that you don't miss an episode of the Flagship Podcast. For Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. Thanks for listening. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Stay safe and keep the faith.